with Grayson Grundhoefer of Sikkim365.com. Brought to you by Pioneer Steel and Pipe, where customer service is their main focus, and best in metal, steel, and pipe for large or small projects, with 2 locations in Waco and Bryan. Family owned and operated since 1943.
Next segment, Jake Hatch on Brigham Young and that game with Notre Dame in Vegas. He's driving, in fact, to Vegas as we speak. He'll join us momentarily and also maybe drop in on that Utah-UCLA game with him. We're now joined by Grayson Grundhoefer, Sikkim365.com football analyst, recruiting analyst, and also co-host of the Bearcast. Grayson, what have you learned about Baylor? They get the off week. What have you learned about them? And is everything you've learned about them that may not be good correctable?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because if you look at this team and kind of what we found out, I think in the early going is, they're far from perfect, that they're not a finished product this early in the season. They're relying on young playmakers, which at times has hurt them. And we've seen that, multiple times throughout the season. I think even some of their older guys, maybe aren't performing up to the level that I think everyone expected them to be playing at. And so I think it's one of those situations where, you come into that Oklahoma State game, for instance, and Baylor really hadn't shown a ton passing the ball. Like you saw high efficiency against Iowa State, but in the Oklahoma State game, you saw volume because they were playing catch up, and you saw, what Blake Shapen can do, what Monterey Baldwin can do. And you just go, okay, so when's this going to become consistent? When are these big plays going to become consistent? And when's the run game going to continue to become more consistent than it has early in the season? So, I think we've learned, certain things about them, but I also would say, I think, both of their games that they've lost, I feel like have been very winnable. They've been in those games. They probably, you could probably flip a coin and you could find out who, ended up winning the game. I know the score of the Oklahoma State game was by 11 on the road. So, Baylor really needed to play better. But I would say if you went back and watched the game, you'd go, okay, there were some little things that if this 1 or 2 plays shifted, Baylor wins that game. And so very easily correctable going into the bye week. But I would say, there's still a lot of work to do if you want to be the team that is going to repeat for a Big 12 championship. And that was their expectation coming into the season.
Grayson, I know Richard Reese has been good. They have not used Squirrel Williams that much. But is this team missing its thumper in Tay McWilliams more than you thought?
Yeah, I kind of thought they would miss him. I would also just say that, I think let's start with a few other parts. I don't think the offensive line has been as dominant as it was last year, in large part because Khalil Keith isn't there. But I would also say, some guys maybe aren't playing to the level that they played at a year ago. So let's start with that. But yes, on the other hand, not having Tay McWilliams was a big deal. And if you go back and watch the spring game this year, you didn't see huge runs from him. You weren't seeing him, break off 70-yard touchdowns. But what you were seeing were him getting hit 2 yards downfield, and then it ends up being a 4 or 5 yard gain. And that is something they're absolutely missing. It was very reminiscent of what Abram Smith did in the spring game prior to the 2021 season. So, yes, I think they're missing him. He's about 6'1", 213 pounds. So he's not as, stout as Abram. He's not as strong as Abram was in the program for a lot longer. But he does give them a little bit more power at the running back position, a little bit more veteran leadership from a bigger running back. And just the guy who I think, coming into the year was thought to be the workload running back, the guy that they were going to give, all kinds of workload to. Then he goes down, and then you have to reevaluate, and you're giving Squirrel some carries, you're giving Richard Reese the bulk of the carries, you're giving Quaylen carries. But I don't think that's who they wanted to be initially to start the year. I think they were going to rely heavily on Tay. So, yeah, they've definitely missed him a lot.
How do you feel about the secondary at this point, Grayson? That was one of the questions coming into this year. I think wide receiver was one that is still a question at this point. Do you feel like the secondary remains a question as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it definitely does. And, I think the safeties have been, for the most part, okay. When you're thinking about Devin Neal, Devin Lemire, Al Walcott, their biggest issues have been, especially Al with the cast on. I think it's been hard for him to play man-to-man coverage. So they've tried to not ask him to do that much. But then you're putting Devin Neal in one-on-one situations, and that's not really what he's best at. So he has struggled there a little bit in the slot. But the biggest issue has been cornerback. And Lorando Johnson has definitely shown flashes at one of the cornerback positions. He's very good against the run. He's very good at getting through screens. So you've seen flashes from him. He's been fairly consistent. I would say he's been good this year, not great. I think there's another level that he can reach. As far as the other side, the other cornerback position, they're having all kinds of problems. And, Mark Milton, A.J. McCarty, both of those guys have taken lumps this year. We saw it again against Oklahoma State. A lot of teams are taking one-on-one shots against those guys down the sideline where there is no safety help and winning those battles more times than not. So I think going into this bye week, it needs to be an open competition. I think for those cornerback positions, if you got to play young guys like we saw Tevin Williams get in there and play, you got to play him, go for him. Give him an opportunity to go out there and play. Reggie Bush, even the true freshman, he's another guy to keep an eye on. I think it needs to be completely open. Allow these guys to go out there and recompete for this other cornerback spot opposite Lorando Johnson and see how things go. Now, if you go through this bye week and you go, oh, man, we still haven't figured this out, then I think you need to seriously consider moving Al Walcott back to cornerback, assuming he doesn't have to wear that cast anymore, because we saw what he did last year. He was their best cornerback last season in my eyes, and they moved him to star because, they felt like he could be put in an opportunity to be extremely efficient, kind of like Jalen Petrie was last year, and really wreak havoc from that position. But they've been giving up so much at cornerback that you almost go, okay, maybe he needs to make that move back to corner. And then you have your three safeties who have been, they're older and they've been playing okay, like Christian Morgan, Devin Neal, and Devin Lemire. I think you feel like you might be able to make up for him at the star while also getting a huge upgrade at cornerback. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I think they really need to figure it out. And if that means moving a guy like Al out there, then I think you need to do it.
I never even thought about the fact what you brought up with Al Walcott. That's a great point because I thought he was a guy that had a chance to be an all-conference corner with how he played at the end of last year, and forgot that I didn't forget about him, but just forgot that might have opened up because sometimes you might strengthen one position but not enough, and then you weaken another one completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, he was playing so good at the end of the year, had that pick six against Ole Miss. But as many people have noted, and it's absolutely true, Al's future most likely in the NFL is at safety. And so you put him at star and you allow him to really grow as a safety and grow into what he could be in the NFL. But the thing of it is if Baylor needs him to play cornerback, they need him to play cornerback and they need to shore up that position, especially, because they have a veteran, they have veteran guys at safety with Neal and Christian Morgan that you feel like you can probably make up for it a little bit. But then again, we haven't seen the best Al Walcott yet because he's had the cast on. So who knows? Maybe that's impacting things as well. But I think as the year progresses, Al is going to be a huge difference maker once he's 100% again.
Well, I think he'd have 2 picks now for sure, if not for the cast. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's impacting him. Grayson, how do you feel about the play of the front seven overall, though? It's not been 9 sacks in the Sugar Bowl great yet.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to note, and I know I posted, I was doing kind of a reaction piece on the website, and I talked about biggest area of improvement. And, Travis mentioned the secondary. That's absolutely one. But the second one I mentioned was getting after the quarterback. And currently Baylor is 68th in the country in sacks. And that includes games where you've gotten to play against weaker competition in Texas State and Albany. And, you look at their other games, they had 2 sacks against BYU, and they had 0 sacks against Oklahoma State. So in your 2 losses, you're averaging 1 sack per game in those. And so it's been a problem. Now, if you look back to last year, I find this to be extremely interesting. They were kind of in the exact same spot. They weren't getting after the quarterback. They weren't wrecking havoc. It was right after the loss to Oklahoma State is when things turned. And it was game 6, and Baylor's about to be in game 6. And last year it was game 6 against West Virginia, and Baylor had 6 sacks. Well, you know who Baylor's playing in Game 6 again this year? West Virginia once again. So I'm wondering if the Mountaineers can be a cure for this. But in all seriousness, who would have thought? I mean, Bryson Jackson, great player. We knew he was going to get after the quarterback. But I find this to be pretty crazy that Bryson Jackson and Matt Jones, they're the leaders in sacks right now. If you combined Gabe Hall, Apuika, Garmin Randolph, TJ Franklin, Jackson Player, Dylan Doyle, and Al Walcott all together, they would have less sacks than just those two guys.
That's yeah.
So it's been a problem. It's been absolutely a problem. Their front four, so call it, they really need to play better, and they need to create more havoc. And if they're not doing that, then they need to revert to what they did last year and bring more pressure with Matt Jones and Al Walcott and Dylan Doyle, kind of like they did a year ago with Jalen Petrie and Terrell Bernard.
Nobody, it seemed like, the Petrie Bernard thing, everyone knew they were All-American players, but their speed and beeline from A to B or wherever they were going was just phenomenal. And obviously it's hard to replace those guys, even if you try. Thanks for your time, Grayson. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it. Grayson Grundhoefer, Sikkim365.com, recruiting coordinator, also or recruiting analyst, along with college football analyst. Tuesdays, they have the Bearcast. Craig and Grayson spend time.